Let me ask you something serious, and don't answer it out loud, just feel it. Have you ever noticed that the moment you start thinking bigger, the voices around you get louder? Not cheering voices, cautious ones. Voices that say, slow down, be realistic, don't change too much. They come from people you trust, people you love, people who claim they want the best for you. And that's exactly why they're so dangerous. Because they don't sound like enemies. They sound like reason. Here's the truth most people never hear. You're not stuck because you're weak, unqualified, or unlucky. You're stuck because you've been surrounded by limits that don't belong to you. And the scariest part is this. If you don't recognize them, you'll spend your entire life calling it normal. This video is not about blaming others. It's about waking up. It's about realizing how doubt is passed down through advice, how dreams are quietly negotiated away, and how potential is buried under approval, fear, and borrowed thinking. If you've ever felt like there's more inside you than your life is showing, if you've ever felt pulled towards something greater but couldn't explain why, then stay with me, because before this video ends, you're going to see clearly who's been holding you back, how it's been happening, and most importantly, how to take your power back without guilt, without anger, and without apology. This might be uncomfortable. It might challenge how you see the people around you. But if you're serious about changing your life, this message will meet you exactly where you are, and it will not let you stay there. Most limits in life are enforced by people who are afraid of your growth, not by your lack of ability, because human beings naturally defend the level at which they feel safe. When someone close to you discourages your ambition, it is rarely because they have measured your potential and found it insufficient. It is because your desire to rise silently exposes their decision to remain where they are. Your growth becomes a mirror, and many people do not like what they see reflected back at them. They begin to project their own fears, past failures, and unfulfilled dreams onto you, dressing those fears up as logic, caution, or concern. They will say the timing is wrong, the risk is too high, or people like you don't succeed at such things, and if you listen closely, you will notice that every warning describes their life, not your future. This is how invisible limits are created, not through force, but through repetition, until doubt feels like common sense. A person may have talent, intelligence, and opportunity, yet remain stuck simply because they have accepted a borrowed belief about what is possible. History proves again and again that progress is never welcomed by the majority at first, because growth disrupts routines and challenges identity. When you begin to outgrow a familiar environment, those who rely on that environment for emotional comfort feel threatened, even if they cannot explain why. They may genuinely believe they are protecting you, but protection that prevents progress is another form of confinement. Over time, constant exposure to such thinking can quietly erode confidence, making capable people hesitate, delay, and second-guess decisions they are fully prepared to handle. This is why many individuals never test the true edge of their ability, not because they lack strength, but because they were trained to distrust it. Once you recognize that resistance from others often has nothing to do with your capacity and everything to do with their fear, you begin to reclaim authority over your own direction. Awareness alone weakens the hold of these external limits because you stop internalizing opinions that were never based on your potential in the first place. Familiar voices often disguise discouragement as care, advice, or realism because closeness gives opinions emotional authority, and that authority can quietly override your own judgment. When warnings come from strangers, they are easy to dismiss, but when they come from parents, friends, relatives, or longtime companions, they feel trustworthy by default. These people know your history, your struggles, and your past mistakes, so when they speak cautiously, it sounds reasonable. They may say they just want to protect you, save you from disappointment, or help you avoid pain, yet hidden beneath that concern is often their own discomfort with uncertainty, risk, and change. What they label as realism is usually a reflection of what they themselves were unwilling or unable to attempt. Because they failed, settled, or chose safety, they assume the same outcome must apply to you, and they pass that assumption along as wisdom. Over time, this kind of disguised discouragement becomes more dangerous than open criticism. Because it does not trigger resistance, it triggers compliance. You begin to second-guess bold ideas before they are fully formed, trimming your vision to fit what sounds sensible to others. The language of care is especially powerful because rejecting it can feel like ingratitude or rebellion. So many people silence their instincts to maintain harmony. They confuse loyalty with obedience and respect with self-denial, Gradually, ambition is softened, urgency is delayed, and dreams are postponed under the banner of being practical. This is how potential is negotiated down in small, polite conversations rather than dramatic failures. Familiar voices rarely intend harm, but intention does not change impact. A warning repeated often enough becomes an internal voice, and eventually you no longer need them to discourage you because you have learned to do it yourself. You start filtering opportunities through what others might say rather than through what your ability demands. The tragedy is that true realism is not about avoiding risk, it is about understanding growth requires it. Real care strengthens courage instead of shrinking it, and real advice expands perspective rather than narrowing it. Once you become aware that discouragement can wear the mask of concern, you regain the ability to listen without surrendering control, choosing which voices deserve influence and which ones merely echo fear dressed up as love. Staying around small thinking slowly trains you to doubt big visions because the mind adapts to the environment it repeatedly absorbs. Every conversation, joke, complaint, and casual opinion becomes part of the mental atmosphere you breathe. And over time, that atmosphere determines what feels possible or impossible. When you are surrounded by people who think only in terms of limitations, survival, and short-term comfort, expansive ideas begin to sound unrealistic, even dangerous. At first, you may still feel inspired, but repeated exposure to narrow perspectives wears down enthusiasm in subtle ways. Big goals are questioned, simplified, or laughed at until you start questioning them yourself, not because they lack merit, but because they no longer feel socially acceptable. Human beings have a deep instinct to belong, and when belonging is tied to conformity, vision becomes a liability. You learn that thinking bigger than the group creates distance, so you unconsciously reduce your ambition to stay connected. This is how extraordinary ideas are abandoned, long before they are tested. Small thinking does not attack vision directly, it suffocates it through routine negativity and low expectations. It normalizes mediocrity by calling it stability and frames ambition as arrogance or naivety. Over time, this environment rewires your internal dialogue, replacing curiosity with caution and imagination with fear. You may still talk about your dreams, but with less conviction, less urgency, and more excuses. The most dangerous effect is that doubt begins to feel intelligent, while faith in your vision feels irresponsible. This mental conditioning is powerful because it happens gradually, without a clear moment of surrender. One day you realize you are no longer aiming high, not because life defeated you, but because your surroundings trained you to lower the ceiling. History shows that major breakthroughs rarely emerge from circles obsessed with playing it safe. They come from individuals who stepped away from limiting influence. The person asks what will be accepted. This shifts decision-making from a position of strength to one of fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of being judged, fear of being alone. As a result, choices are delayed, opportunities are missed, and momentum is broken. The mind becomes crowded with imagined reactions, making it difficult to hear one's own reasoning clearly. People in this state may appear thoughtful or cautious, but internally, they are conflicted, torn between their desires and the need for emotional safety. The most damaging consequence is the erosion of self-belief. Each time someone ignores their inner voice to follow external opinion, they send a message to themselves that their judgment cannot be trusted. Repeated often enough, this creates a cycle of self-doubt that reinforces dependence even further. Strong decision-makers are not those who never listen to others, but those who can listen without surrendering control. Emotional independence allows advice to be evaluated rather than obeyed. It creates space for reflection instead of reaction. Without this independence, even well-intentioned opinions can derail progress because the individual lacks an internal anchor. Life rewards decisiveness, but decisiveness requires self-trust. And self-trust cannot exist where emotional approval is the primary currency. When a person learns to tolerate disagreement, disapproval, and misunderstanding without losing confidence, decision-making sharpens naturally. Choices become faster, clearer, and more aligned with long-term vision. Emotional independence does not mean isolation, it means stability. It means standing firmly enough in your own belief that the noise around you no longer determines your direction. Separation from negative influence is a requirement for personal power, not an act of arrogance, because growth cannot survive in an environment that constantly questions its right to exist. Every individual operates within a field of influence shaped by conversations, attitudes, expectations, and emotional energy. And when that field is dominated by pessimism, doubt, or resentment, personal strength is steadily drained. Negative influence does not always appear hostile. It often comes wrapped in familiarity, humor, or shared history, which makes it harder to challenge. Remaining immersed in such environments demands constant self-defense, leaving little energy for creation, focus, or disciplined action. Over time, the individual begins to adapt, lowering standards and expectations just to maintain peace. Separation, in this sense, is not rejection of people, but refusal to internalize their limitations. Many hesitate to create distance because they fear being labeled selfish, proud, or disloyal, yet true disloyalty is abandoning one's potential to preserve comfort. Personal power depends on clarity, and clarity requires space. When the mind is no longer crowded by discouraging voices, intuition strengthens and decisions become more intentional. This distance allows a person to observe patterns objectively, recognizing how certain interactions consistently produce doubt, fatigue, or confusion. Once seen clearly, continued exposure becomes a choice rather than an obligation. Those who have achieved significant progress often describe a period of isolation not as loneliness but as restoration. In that quiet, they reconnect with their purpose, refine their goals, and rebuild belief without interference. Negative influence thrives on proximity. It loses power when denied access. This is why separation is often misunderstood by those who benefit from keeping you within their emotional reach. They may accuse you of changing or becoming distant, but change is the very evidence of growth. Arrogance seeks superiority. Separation seeks alignment. It is the act of choosing environments that reinforce discipline, vision, and responsibility. Without this shift, personal power remains diluted, constantly negotiated with external moods and opinions. Strength requires ownership of one's inner world, and that ownership begins with guarding what enters it. When a person finally prioritizes mental and emotional alignment over familiarity, energy returns, focus sharpens, and forward movement becomes natural. Separation, then, is not an escape from others, but a commitment to becoming who you were capable of being all along. They are holding you back only as long as you allow their fears, opinions, and limitations to live rent-free in your mind. The moment you recognize that not every familiar voice deserves authority, not every warning is wisdom, and not every bond supports growth, you reclaim your power. Big visions require strong boundaries, emotional independence, and the courage to stand alone before you stand apart. When you stop seeking permission to become more, your confidence stabilizes, your decisions sharpen, and your path clears. Growth is not betrayal, separation is not arrogance, and choosing yourself is not selfish. The life you want demands a higher level of thinking, and that level begins where borrowed limits end. Good luck on your journey of growth, discipline, and self-belief. May you have the courage to trust your vision even when others doubt it, and the strength to keep moving forward when the path feels lonely. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your willingness to invest in your own potential. Your future begins with the choices you make today.